to say that the Portuguese authorities and the Portuguese government from different political sides and for more than 15 years that have been approving measures to attract investment, international investment to Portugal, and to attract people to Portugal due to the two main and huge problems that exist in Portugal, which are lack of people and lack of capital. So this is just to tell you that you will find here in Portugal a very good environment for international investment and for relocation in Portugal. So I think it's not so important to speak about the good climate that we may have, and that we have. We have more or less 300 days of sun in Portugal during a year. We have a very, I would say, interesting historical heritage, the same borders for around 900 years, even with a country like Spain nearby. We have a good quality of life and a low cost of living in Portugal. If we compare the square meter price with Paris, with Madrid, with London, or with New York, or with any other capital in Europe, Portugal will have certainly one of the lowest cost of living and one of the square meter price lower. We also have, you can walk here nearby. We are in the main road of Lisbon at 4 o'clock in the morning with your phone without any problem. We are considered for Global Peace Index 2022 in the third position. So this is a very safe country. At the same time, I could say, which is important, that in Portugal, almost everyone speaks English, and most of people speaks two languages, so English and French or German. And the Portuguese is so similar with Spanish that the Portuguese people do not invest in Spanish and invest in different languages like English, French, or German. I should also point out that our political, social, and economic stability is coming also from different governments for the last 15, 20, 25 years, and since the revolution of 74, which means that even the governments from the left wing and from the right wing have the same political strategy to attract foreign people and to attract foreign capital. And highly rated, we are highly rated, Portugal is highly rated by the World Bank for the use of doing business. So this is just to point out that we will find a very open environment, economic, social, and cultural environment to accept investment and to attract investment in foreign people to live in Portugal. For that, there are people and investors that are coming from outside of Europe and some that are coming from Europe. If we are speaking about non-Europeans, of course, that you will need to a legal residency authorization to enter in Portugal. About the visas, I pass the word to Duarte that will tell you what is important about that.
Thank you, Rogério. Good morning to everyone. Also thanking to Rachel. I will start with known passive income visa. Probably you have heard the name D7 visa. This is, as of today, probably one of the most used types of visa to enter into Portugal for someone that wants to, in fact, reside in Portugal. The D7 visa, it's very used because it's probably the simpler one. And why is it the simpler one? Because the the most demanding thing is that we need to show, an applicant needs to show to the Portuguese authorities that he or she has enough funds to support their life in Portugal. It's called passive income visa because we need to show some sort of passive income. And what is considered passive income? Dividends, interests from a bank account, but also rents. For example, if you have a property abroad and you are receiving rents, you can use this income as the proof in Portugal, and also pensions. Brief understanding on how this works, the D7 visa and also the other visas that we are going to discuss is a two-step process, meaning that they all start in the Portuguese consulates of the residency area of the applicant. They get the visa, which will be valid for 120 days. And within this period of time, the applicant needs to arrive in Portugal and apply to the residency authorization. And then they will receive the proper card, which will be valid for 2 years and then renewable for 3 years. Rachel, if you can proceed, please. Another option, it's very used and at least very advertised in Portugal, the so-called startup visa, that it's included also in what we call the D27 visa. It's a little bit different because it's aimed for entrepreneurs or for business person that wants to establish a business and to reside in Portugal. So it has a purpose of attracting investment, of attracting innovation, and the possibility of also creating jobs, some sort of jobs in Portugal. Specifically, the startup visa needs to go through a process before the Portuguese certified incubator. So it's basically a process of startups, of having a startup in Portugal. Just a side note on this type of procedure. First, the procedure is very similar to the D7. So with one difference, which is the D2 can be started immediately as a residency authorization. So going immediately to the application of the residency authorization. But we usually suggest to go through the same procedure. So going through the visa process, obtaining the visa, and only after obtaining the residency authorization. It's an interesting type of residency authorization, but more interesting in the paper rather than practically speaking. This last stage of needing to have a company, of incorporating a company in Portugal, perhaps it's not the best idea to have immediately having connected your residency authorization with your future company in Portugal. So as a rule, we prefer to use the D7 if possible, of course. Nowadays, we have also a new type of visa in slide number 5, the digital nomad visa, that was recently created by the Portuguese authorities. And as the name states for itself, the purpose of this is trying to attract remote workers to Portugal. Was basically an idea of trying to compete with other countries that had already created this type of digital nomad visa. And again, the procedure is the same. We need to go through the Portuguese consulate, getting the visa, and only after getting the Portuguese residency authorization. And the specific documents to get the digital nomad visa is having a work contract with a foreign company, with a specific drafting of the contract, allowing the worker to work remotely from Portugal. Some notes also regarding this digital nomad visa. It's a very interesting idea. We have been working a lot with this type of visa, but please be careful that the Portuguese authorities, and actually the world authorities, were only focused on the immigration side and not on the taxation side. Having a contract from a foreign company, but working from Portugal might lead to taxation on personal income tax here in Portugal. So that also needs to be analyzed. Last but not the least, we still have, as of today, the very famous golden visa. It's still working, it's still in force. But it's going to end. We have put a note regarding this golden visa because it's going to end. It was already announced, The legislation is already in the Portuguese Parliament. It will still take a while, so around 1 month and a half, roughly. But this is it might be interesting. What we have heard is that what is the only definite idea that the Portuguese authorities have for now is that the real estate investments will end, period. All the others might continue with some different names. Specifically, one was already announced that it will continue, which is the cultural investment, which is basically not exactly an investment, is if the applicant has an application or a donation to a Portuguese institution like a museum or a foundation, it will be possible to have this residency authorization even in the future. Michelle, sorry, if you don't mind proceeding. This was what I was already mentioning. What we can say right now is the current timeline, which perhaps it's important if someone is still thinking about investing in the golden visa, which is, as I mentioned, this whole program is already actually approved in the Portuguese Parliament, but approved generally. What does this mean? That the whole legislation that includes the end of the golden visa and a lot of other measures regarding housing in Portugal was already approved, but as a whole. So the whole diploma was approved. Now we will have to go through the next stage, and the next stage is an approval article by article of this legislation. This will take some time. We already know that the final voting regarding the whole program, so after this specific approval of article by article, is already scheduled for the 19th of July, so month 7. So until then, it will still be possible to proceed with the golden visa. One important thing, which is if all the applications until the entry into force of the new legislation will be accepted, will be validated, will be analyzed. If they are approved or not, something that we can only know afterwards. And this is it. We will now go through to the taxation in Portugal. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Duarte, for this explanation. So I will point out, well, 3 items, different items that I think it could that will be useful for you, which will be about the real estate taxation. So with these 2 slides, you will have an idea about what is the tax framework on real estate ownership and transfer, but also about a specific tax regime that is known as the non-habitual tax resident regime, that it is a kind of non-dom tax regime that you find in UK, but that you may find in other countries, namely in Spain, in Greece, or in Italy. This is a different one. As you will be able to understand, it's a very interesting one because it's large and easy to understand. So, after all, at the end, I will let you a word about our double tax network tax treaties, which are really nowadays very interesting. So, starting by the real estate taxation, we have 2 kinds of real estate taxation. On ownership of real estate taxation and on transfer and on the purchase of an apartment of a house. About the real estate taxation ownership, we have 2 taxes. They are not so important because they are small taxes, They are one of them is a municipal property tax, so it's a receipt of the municipalities, which is called IME. IME. We will find here a tax rate between 0.3% until 0.45% on what we call the patrimonial value tax, which is an official value of the property that we could say that it's more or less 85% of the market price. So if you want to make some counts, you should count with a tax between 0.3 until 0.45 on this taxable value of the property, that it's more or less 85% of the market value. Well, there are different measures, anti-avoidance tax measures. One of them is that if the owner is, if the property is held by an entity resident in a tax haven, and there is a list of blacklisted jurisdictions, it will go up to 7.5%. But the normal tax rate goes between 0.3 and 0.45. At the same time, we can find also some exemptions, namely for rehabilitation of the real estate. So if there is a rehabilitation after purchase of an apartment of an house in certain conditions, we can have and we can find an exemption. There is also other exemptions, apart of these ones that I point you out of here. There is also a state property tax that is called IME, which is an additional to this IME, that are subject both individuals and companies, which is 0.7% also on the taxable asset value, but just after the first 1,200,000 taxable value. So if the taxable value is more or less 85% of the market value, it means that we are speaking about the market value of around 1,500,000 euros. That will be taxable with 0.7%, but just on the amount up to after these 1,200,000 euros. For the companies, the tax rate is lower, which is 0.4%. But you do not find this exemption on the base until the 1,200,000 of taxable asset value. On the transfer,
could I ask one question, please?
At the end, okay, if you don't mind, because we are going to give all the answers. Thank you very much. On the transfer of the real estate, please, can you proceed, Rachel, to the other slide? So on the transfer of the property, there is another tax that is called the tax on the transfer of real estate, which is IMT, known as IMT, where we can find, and this is not on the taxable asset value, but on the price of the on the purchase price, and this tax rate can go up to 8%, but it's a progressive tax rate that can come from 0 to this 8%. That usually it's around between the 4 and 6% on the price, on the purchase price. Here you can, on the transfer of, on a purchase, you can also have a stamp tax of 0.8% on the taxable asset value. That is also for the state and not a municipality tax. And also in this case, you can find different exemptions, namely the one on the acquisition of properties to resale. If you resell it, if you resell it nowadays in 3 years, but in the future in 1 year, and if it's a company, you can in fact find here an exemption, but also exemptions on rehabilitation. Also other exemptions that we point out here, namely these on the acquisitions of buildings classified as public with public interest. One more, please. Can you proceed, Rachel? So this is just to point you out that
slide number 12. Do I have to move to slide number 13?
No, it's this one. Okay, okay. Just this slide is just to point you out that, as Duarte was saying, that the other one, the first before, just to point you out that the government and the parliament are discussing new measures about real estate taxation. Namely reducing from 3 to 1 year the period in which properties acquired for resale have to be resold, but also new exemptions on IMT, on stamp tax, on IME, and on IEE. So we are waiting for new legislation with some different measures, but also new different exemptions. This non-habitual tax resident regime, known as NHR, is really interesting because it will grant the new resident, called a non-habitual resident. Is a non-habitual resident because before he was not resident. This is the reason of his title of non-habitual tax resident. This non-habitual tax resident, with this status that he can request, will grant him an exemption on the income from outside of Portugal. It means that any income that will come from outside of Portugal to this new resident in Portugal, this non-habitual tax resident, or almost all is the income coming from outside of Portugal, will be exempted of personal income tax. This will include salaries, will include fees, will include any kind of capital income, namely bank interests, dividends, or royalties, and it will include rents, and it will also include capital gains on immovable property. On pensions, we will find here not an exemption, but a flat rate of 10%. As I will explain to you, there are some tax treaties signed by Portugal, and before Rachel, I finished, but before I didn't finish this. These tax treaties also grant, with the clause on the pensions, that the state of the source is not able to tax, and that the exclusivity of taxation is in the country of tax resident, which means that if someone gets this new tax status of a non-habitual tax resident, And if receives pensions from outside of Portugal, this pension will not be taxed on the source, at the source, on the state of the source, and will just be taxable in Portugal, but with this flat rate of 10%. On the income, on the Portuguese source income, and if it's income, employment income or self-employment income, we will find here a flat rate of 20% if it's included in a public list of activities that the government approved by specific legislation. It's a large list that includes engineers, doctors, etc. It's a really large list, even managers of companies that will enable these new residents to be exempted of to have a tax rate, a flat tax rate of 20%. Please, the last one, Rachel. Now, this is also important because if we are speaking about the tax legislation in Portugal, and namely about the specific tax status that can be demanded, requested by a new resident, that during a period of 10 years will grant him these tax benefits. On the other side, on the source of the income, these double tax treaties will grant a situation of not having a double tax situation. Just to let you know that for the last 20, 25, 30 years, Portugal have been signing tax treaties, and in this network of double tax treaties, we now include all the Portuguese-speaking countries without any exception. Also, all the European countries without any exception. There is two cases, two Scandinavian states, which is Sweden and Finland, that meanwhile have denounced the tax treaty, that they are not in force now, but the tax treaties are signed with all the European countries and with almost all the OECD countries, which means that if the income is source of the income is coming from any of these any of these states which have signed tax treaty with Portugal, they will be limited or not be able to tax the income that will come to Portugal for these new residents. I think this is what is important to say to you now, and we are most available for any questions